So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Chair Hansen here. I am going to convene the mechanical board meeting of March 2nd, 2022 to order this morning at 9:30. Melissa, would you please call for the roll?
Chair Jay Hansen.
Present.
Vice Chair Eric Fanning.
Present.
Walter Cottle excused. Derek Frazier.
Present.
Chris Miller.
Present.
Jed Sherman.
Here.
Ted Zook will be arriving soon. He has a conflicting meeting. So when he arrives, we will have a quorum, Chair Hansen.
Okay. So if we haven't already, let's just take a quick look at the minutes from the the agenda. And if there are any questions regarding the order of the business, please raise them now. Otherwise, I am going to rule the agenda in order. Are there any questions about the minutes from the last meeting of September 1st? Okay, hearing none as I drive. Very dangerous. I, Chair Hansen, rule the minutes from the September 1st, 2021 meeting final. The next scheduled meeting that we will have will be on June 1st, 2022. And the meetings for the rest of the year will be, of course, June 1st, September 14th, and December 7th. Andy, our Senior Policy Advisor, are there any public comments? Do you have any announcements around public comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. As of this morning, we've not received any requests for general public comment. We would like to hold the meeting open for just a moment here in case there's someone on the line that would like to provide general public comment to the board. If you're on the line and would like to provide public comment, please say so now. Please state your name and affiliation, if any, for the record. Okay, hearing none, Mr. Chair, that concludes the public comment agenda item.
All right, very good. Move on to reports. Mark, do you have a report for the board?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, Mark Heizer with the division. Would like to start off with a few division staff updates. You may see a familiar name and face joining the meeting today. Todd Smith is returning to Policy and Technical Services as the manager for Policy and Technical Services. He had been serving temporary as interim manager for the enforcement team. It's really great to have Todd back with us, who looking forward to his leadership among the PTS staff. With that, Julia Heizer, who had been the PTS Senior Policy Advisor, has moved to the Enforcement Division to serve as their permanent manager. So congratulations to Julia, but won't be seeing her on the PTS side now. And with her move, we would also like to note that Andy Boulton, who has served as a policy analyst to several boards, including this one, is now moving up into Julia's position as the Senior Policy Advisor for Policy and Technical Services. And finally, we'd like to welcome Terry Watson to the PTS team. Terry comes to us from the Oregon OSHA office, where she had 10 years of prior experience. Terry's going to serve as a senior policy analyst and as our legislative coordinator. Moving on to other items, just an update that the mechanical minor labels program is still moving forward, trying to get that up to speed. It's in its infancy still, trying to look for more uptake among contractors and other, and for use in more jurisdictions. It's a great path for small alterations like bath fan replacements, replacing range hood, maybe a small VRF system. One additional item that is happening is we are going to be beginning a mechanical chiefs meeting. This is where the division will host meetings with local mechanical inspectors and plan reviewers to come in. It's going to fill a void that was left when the Oregon Mechanical Officials Association disbanded. They were absorbed into the Oregon Building Officials Association. This will be like the plumbing chiefs meetings that are hosted by our plumbing chief, Andy Skinner. It's a great opportunity for question and answers, discussion of hot topics, recording what's happening out in the getting feedback from inspectors and plan reviewers. Oregon mechanical officials used to meet with contractors group on a quarterly basis to get feedback from installers. We may try and find another way to maybe get some of that as well, so we can get the information to our building officials of what's happening and what contractors are seeing, so we can get feedback on really consistent application of the code through the state and seeing where something like a statewide interpretation might be needed to answer questions. And with that, Chair Hansen, that is it for the program update. Thank you.
Chair Hansen, we think your mic is muted.
Can I be heard now?
Yes.
I can be heard now. All right. I was doing so well. We have no communications and we have no unfinished business. So we will move on to new business. And Andy, you're going to be up. So get yourself prepared. And would you like to introduce the approval of the Code Committee's recommended provisions for 2022?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. Really quickly, I'd like to confirm, I don't see Ted Zook yet on the participant list. Is Ted, are you here? Okay, if he's not here yet, Mr. Chair, I might suggest us swapping this item with the next one, because this one will require a motion and we don't have a quorum yet.
Yeah, let's move on to item B. To the review and receive feedback on the division's plan to convene a work group to discuss and provide recommendations on the topic of ventilation of dwelling units. You're still up, Andy, so you don't get a reprieve. But would you like to introduce that to us, please?
Didn't even take myself off mute or on mute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. During the public proposal periods for the 2022 Oregon Structural Specialty Code and the 2022 Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code, the division received proposals that would prohibit natural ventilation in dwelling units. If adopted, this change would have a broad impact across the purview of multiple boards. The OSSC is the code location for natural ventilation requirements, but once mechanical ventilation is selected as the compliance path, then the OMSC requirements in section 403 govern. Additionally, changes would impact the work of both the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board and the Construction Industry Energy Board. Because of the broad impact of the change, the division recommended to the Building Code Structures Board that a work group be created to discuss and make recommendations regarding ventilation code revisions for dwelling units. The BCSB, approve the recommendation. Additionally, the division presented this recommendation to the 2022 OMSC Code Committee, and the committee also approved the division's recommendation to convene a work group to study the issue. The committee recommended only limited updates to the ventilation provisions pending the recommendations that come out of that work group. The division is starting the process of forming this work group to discuss this issue and provide recommendations to the affected boards. This item does not require a motion from the board, but the division welcomes any discussion or feedback that the board has on the formation and subject of this work group. In particular, if the board has any thoughts on who should sit on the work group, or if there are any specific questions that the board would like the work group to consider, we'd really appreciate that. Finally, we do have Mark Heizer from the division ready, willing, and able to help out if there are any technical questions relating to the work group. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Just one little interjection. If we have suggestions or some feedback that staff might appreciate, do we specifically send that to you, Andy?
You can send it to me, and yeah, I will make sure to get it wherever it needs to go.
Okay, very good. Mark, can you give us some details, some intimate mechanical details about this work group?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. For the record, Mark Heizer with the division. What the work group is looking to clarify is that for some time there's been a division of, I guess, scope and authority that when it comes to any ventilation for buildings, that if you could select a natural ventilation path, and that was set via the structural code in chapter 12. And once a building was selected to not use the natural ventilation path and they were doing mechanical ventilation, of course, chapter 4 and indirectly chapter 5 of the Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code controlled, how you did mechanical ventilation. What has come in through the model codes and has had some, I guess, clarity issues that weren't, some things that weren't perfectly clear, was what would happen when you had dwelling unit ventilation and where this applied. If dwelling units, such as in our occupancies, were sealed too tightly and were tested to be sealed, you were required to do mechanical ventilation on dwelling units. And through code, there have been some differences as to how this applied to either low-rise dwelling units, those 3 stories and under, and then those that are high-rise dwelling units. The differences within occupancies when you get to discussing R2, 3, and 4 occupancies. Sometimes it might be an apartment, but those can also include dormitory rooms and other things that aren't officially qualifying as a dwelling unit. There's a lot of language that would need to be cleaned and coordinated to make this work and to look at the impacts that happen with this language and to get it consistent among not only the structural code, but the mechanical code, and also of course, the low-rise units that are covered by the RMSB board, but also there are potential triggers once you move to mechanical ventilation on dwelling units, whether or not there is a requirement for heat recovery units that could be triggered as well, which gets to costs and impacts related to the energy board. There have been a lot of things that the state of Oregon has done in the past relative to ventilation in dwelling units. We have a higher ventilation rates required for both bathrooms and kitchens in the Oregon code. We've done that since I believe 2009, when the Construction Claims Task Force set forward higher ventilation rates for Oregon. So it's a multi-layered issue, looking at all of these to see what would be the appropriate ventilation rates for dwelling units, when it is triggered, how it can be done, whether would still be a natural ventilation path, either wholly or partially for different dwelling units and across the different boards. So the reason for the work group is to look at this closely and come up with because there are some differences between the mechanical code and other code and some of the residential codes for the ventilation rates as well. So to look at this holistically across all the codes, all the boards, and come up with a solution that is really Oregon appropriate is the intent of the work group. It's a lot to bite off. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you. And be available for any questions if needed.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Jed. Do we have, not Jed, Ted. Jesus criminy. Sorry, Jed. You're right there in front of me. Hi, Jed. Jed's at the beach. I don't see Ted. So should we go through, Melissa, should we go through, or I guess anyone with staff can comment, our first item, and just more for informative because we can't act on it without Ted. What do you guys think?
Just to update you, I did send Ted an email checking in with him. Have not yet heard back.
Okay, but again, should we just review? We can do that. So we're not going to be able to go to a vote. So Andy, why don't you talk about the recommended provisions and we'll follow up with Mark, because it does not hurt us as a group, I think, to be informed, and we can still wait on Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Boulton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. At the board's September 1st, 2021 meeting, the board appointed a code committee to review model code changes, Oregon amendments, and public proposals to make recommendations to the board on what changes should be included in the 2022 OMSC. The committee met 2 times to review and discuss, first on October 25th, 2021, and the second on February 3rd, 2022. Just a quick note, there is a typo in my memo in your board packet that suggests the first committee meeting happened in the future. This is incorrect. The committee provided recommendations to the board, and they are detailed on a matrix included in your board packet. The division is asking that the board review and approve the committee's recommended provisions for the 2022 Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code. Once again, Mark Heizer from the division is available for any technical questions about those recommendations. This item will require a motion, so hopefully we'll have Ted shortly. And any motion to approve the recommendations should include a finding by the board that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, that's quite a list. Not as big as has been in the past, but Mark, let's have a brief little comment as we go through so we can understand the amendments.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Again, Mark Heizer with the division. As a reminder, the Code Committee did have 2 meetings and carefully considered all of the provisions for the 22 OMSC. They were very thorough in their readings and made some good comments and recommendations to clarify the intent of the code. At your pleasure, Chair Hansen, I plan to move through the matrix items as efficiently as possible and to highlight significant committee recommendations to the board, trying to limit not going through every single piece. At your pleasure, I will cover each chapter in groups, and the board can discuss any of the matrix items in more detail before we move to the next chapter. And as noted, we'll try and keep track of any items that might have a fiscal impact as we progress through the matrix. So with that.
Excellent, but I believe it is important. I personally learned quite a bit about what's coming up in the code changes, and there are a couple on here worth being very aware of. So please.
All right. If Melissa, if you could put on the screen the 2022 Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code matrix, we can start beginning with Chapter 2. And On chapter 2 for the Oregon amendments, really there weren't any significant changes to note in chapter 2, which is definitions. So we're retaining all current Oregon amendments. Just as a note, as we go through the remainder of the chapters, that yes, we will be unless noted, Oregon amendments will continue from past changes to the previous OMSC will be carried forward. I don't know if anyone had a chance to go through the documents and had any questions on definitions. If not, we can move forward to chapter 3 on general regulation. Chapter 3, we have section 307.2.1 on condensate disposal. There has been a Oregon amendment for some time about possible locations for disposal. One thing that the committee recommended was also adding an additional line of or other approved locations to item 1 of condensate disposal. This gives a little more flexibility. Otherwise, it takes a lot more work for, should you have an atypical location to dispose of condensate, it would take an official appeal or local alternate method. This allows approval of other places to discharge condensate. It was a good addition. Hope they move that one forward. And
Mark, I've personally bumped up against this a few times. You're just giving inspectors the authority to, this language is giving inspectors authority to approve in the field on the fly, different locations.
That is correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And then there was a minor change in the other model code language on discharge locations. So it's just making it clear that some of the more common practices and that have been accepted in the past for condensate discharge are now included in code. That is it for the big changes in chapter 3.
Through Chair Hansen, a quick question for you, Mark. Are those acceptable locations listed out in the modification, or as Chair Hansen mentioned, is that up to the code reviewer, plan reviewer, and inspector's discretion?
So going back to what the word that is in italics as far as approved, that means it is reviewed and approved by the building official. So in addition to what is on the list, what it does is it allows sort of an on-the-fly ability to accept items that aren't on the specific list of approved locations. So
okay, very good.
The word approved is normally italicized, and that's sort of the magic word for the local building official discretion.
Understood. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. If no further questions on chapter 3, we can move on to ventilation. And some of this is where we get into the alignment of the residential code and the, let's bring this back up. The structural code, the language that had been in the really discharging sections of chapter 4 for dwelling unit ventilation. What the committee is recommending is just to clarify for this code cycle until the work group can come up with better language, is removing the language that says dwelling units complying with the air leakage requirements of the IECC or ASHRAE 90.1 shall be ventilated by mechanical means in accordance with section 403. This is really maintaining the current OMSC and OSSC triggers for ventilation in dwelling units. And once the recommendations of the work group come back, we will be determining methods, ventilation quantities, et cetera, and potential energy impacts later for what happens to when ventilation for our occupancy dwelling units might be mandatory. So, and which types of, whether it's a dwelling unit or dwelling unit and sleeping unit, settling this later. So that is what happened with section 401.2 and 403.1. And at that, part of this was the disapproval of the public proposal OMSC 2201. This is to bring all this forward as one good, well thought out process for addressing dwelling units for mechanical ventilation. Moving on to section 401.4 and 501.3.1, model code brought in a new allowance for, say, for these little concentric intake and discharge for heat recovery units, or say a single dwelling unit apartment ventilation. It's brought in so that you don't have to have a separation distance between the intake and the exhaust for this basic dwelling unit environmental air exhaust. That was brought in, but there was also a public proposal that was brought in, not just to require approval, but to let it be known that these could be done. The IMC made the language that it required approval. This would allow it to be done without having to seek special approval to put in these units. So it's for, dwelling unit air exhaust, dwelling unit air intake through these concentric units, much like you have for a, also considering separation distance for something like an air economizer on a unit. You don't bring in the separation between a mechanical exhaust and a mechanical intake. So it will allow more flexibility for code. The code committee did take out the word appliance from the public proposal because we're dealing with equipment. Well, when we're talking about a fan unit, it's not a combination unit that goes to a furnace. And it's to avoid any confusion or not being able to apply it to a heat recovery ventilation unit. The next item is 403.3 on, there was a public proposal again about different ventilation units under OMSC proposal 22-03, pending the discussion and approval by the work group and what they bring back. This public proposal was disapproved. So we're going to wait until the work group gets done on that. The next item is a footnote clarification done in the model code to table 403.3.1.1. Used to be a simpler numbering once upon a time, but now it's got a bigger, longer number. It's been rewritten to lessen the impact of recirculated exhaust from spaces such as toilet rooms, shower rooms, locker rooms. The note wasn't clear to the code committee, and instead of saying for occupancies other than science labs, they clarified it that this is really relative to environmental air exhaust. So there's a definition for that. It would include the bathroom exhaust, shower room exhaust. Makes it clearer than using science lab language just was not getting to the intent for them, and it was a really good cleanup in our opinion. So that's one modification that the code committee did do to make that section that footnote even clearer. Moving on to, if you'd like, Chair Hansen, we can skip some of these minor ones that are just really clarifications, or would you like to continue with each item, Chair Hansen?
Well, I can use each item, but we do have time to pay attention to. So,
okay.
I'm gonna defer to your expertise on highlighting the appropriate items.
Okay. So moving to page 2, section 403.1.3 on demand control ventilation. It was just a clarification that if you do have demand control ventilation, there is a ventilation requirement per square foot of occupied space that needs to continue. So you can drop out the ventilation air. That's in table 403.3.1.1. For people, you can shut that air off, but you can't turn off what's required for minimum ventilation required per square foot. They are recognizing in the next item, 403.3.2.1, outdoor air for dwelling units, that a balanced system does provide better ventilation than a simply strictly exhaust only or supply only system, and they do give credit for that. This will also be addressed. This is a model code change that we're not going to mess with at this point, but when we do get to the residential ventilation committee, we will do more looking at addressing of how much credit you can get for either balance systems and balanced and distributed systems. That's in the future. The last two items are just carrying forward previous organ amendments, noting the proper location for ambulatory care, ventilation, and also items that we do for exhaust from parking garages. Are there any questions from the committee regarding from the board, excuse me, regarding chapter 4? Hearing none, we will move on to chapter 5, exhaust systems. Nice big chapter. There was a really good clarification in section 501 about independent systems, getting that language clearer each code cycle, it seems, from the building code and mechanical codes, just which exhausts can be mixed and which ones have to be independent, making that clearer. One item of actual physical impact that did come in the mechanical code is the next item, 502.20.1. Oregon was one of the leaders in requiring exhaust from manicure and pedicure stations. They have brought in a new control requirement that these systems do need to operate continuously when the nail system or the nail salon is open for business, so that it might require an interlock between, say, the building thermostat occupied time to also turn on the nail station exhaust to make sure that there is a turnover of air and provide, take care of the fumes from nail exhaust.
I'd like to interject a little something in that regard, if I could, Mark, while you get yourself set for the next one. I have two very close friends whose wives have suffered greatly from breast cancer, and one of them passed away after 11 years of this, and the other one is still fighting it. And this is an excellent example of how the efforts that we put into our industry in this regard can have a positive impact. Both of their cancers were not directly linked, but very highly suspicious of their jobs as manicurists. And so that's all I want to say about that. We're doing a good job.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Moving on to the next real item would be moving down to the 504.6 booster fan prohibition. This is not a prohibition on the dryer duct, dryer power ventilators. They are still allowed. This is about using sort of a prohibition of a non-listed fan to be used. That's not intended for the use with dryers. Those are prohibited. It's a new section that came into the model code. So it's really not an impact. It's more for clarification, but wanted to note that it's not prohibiting those listed, inline dryer duct or dryer power ventilator fans.
Even though it says it is a prohibition of domestic booster fans, it is not
Right.
a prohibition of domestic booster fans.
Chair Hansen, it's a prohibition of so section 504.5 is about the specific fan type that's used for this, that has a separate listing. It was more to say, don't put a bath fan or an inline fan that's not intended for that in a dryer system. So the units that are made for that and have a specific listing are still allowed under section 504.5. Okay. It was a little confusing to me too. That's why I wanted to bring that up, is to make sure that it's not completely prohibiting the items that are listed and tested for that use. We are maintaining a few organ amendments that have been retained: 50492, 50493, and also 505.2 are all still maintained. When we get, let's move to 505.6 again is just some other alignments, former organ or existing organ amendments that we're just continuing to move forward. There's a note about potential fiscal savings for 506.3.2.5 about the duct test. We've had organ amendments for alternates to just using a light test. Since it is a past amendment, it wouldn't be a new fiscal savings for this go round, but it continues something that allows more alternates for testing the tightness of grease duct. We'll go to 506.3.7, factory built grease duct slope. Currently, on long grease duct runs, there was a specific requirement for the shape and size of grease traps when you have a low point in a long run of factory built or of any grease duct. When you are going to a factory built unit, you don't want to have to cut into it and do something that wouldn't be listed for that. And the manufacturers of these ducts have created their own specific low point attachments for low point and grease duct. And so this is going to allow them to continue to use factory built duct, which sometimes will happen on a really, say, a food service in the middle of a convention center or, large building where they have to do a long run. They can use this prefabricated duct and not have to worry about cutting into those ducts to meet what the shape and size that are for field or field fabricated ductwork. One item, 507.1 is sort of good news for the restaurant industry. In the past, we've had questions about smokers, very popular. It creates a new exception from requiring a type 1 hood over a smoker oven when they have an integral exhaust system and are listed for installation without a type 1 hood.
Did you look at outside?
So there was a big movement of a popularity of barbecue smoker locations and what had to be done with these. This is really clarifying that we can continue to do that when it does have a listing and can be installed without a type 1 hood. The way the code read was, regardless if you put a smoker inside a restaurant, it had to have a type 1 hood over it. And this is going to help make it easier for people in the field. Moving on, again, just retaining some organ amendments under 507.1.2 and 511.1.1. No changes there, just noting that these are some past exceptions. On 514.2, starting on the top of page 3, There is a new or a modification when it comes to energy recovery ventilation systems. Of course, it's been really prohibited and not practical to have an energy recovery ventilation system for type 1 hoods where you have a lot of grease in the air. They're just going to clog up and just be really hard to maintain. But it is noting that if you have a type 2 hood, such as something that's say over a dishwasher, you could recover the energy from that exhaust. So type 2 exhaust systems are allowed to have ERVs. And that is it for chapter 5 on exhaust systems.
Through the chair, Mark, quick question on that. Is that 514.2, is that just stating that it is allowed and not required, or is it required to have energy ventilation or heat recovery on type 2 hoods?
Thank you for the question to the chair and the rest of the board members. It is about that it's allowed. It is not a requirement to have it. What it's in the past, the language was unclear, and that any exhaust from a kitchen couldn't be put onto an ERV. This is now clarifying that if you're wanting to do it, it may be done for type 1 exhausts now. So it's not a requirement to have it on type 2. This is really part of the installation and use of energy recovery ventilation systems.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from the board on this, on chapter 5 and exhaust? All right. So moving forward to chapter 6, again, Mark Heizer with the division, want to point out that there was a clarification about pipe and duct insulation within plenums. In the past, of course, there are some limitations as to the flame and smoke spread for items that are in plenums. Some piping does not meet this requirement, but in the past, it was if it had insulation that met the flame and smoke spread requirements, you could just wrap the pipe in that, and you could then place pipe that normally couldn't be in a return or supplier plenum could then be placed in a plenum. So non-compliant pipe could just be wrapped in a compliant insulation and be installed. They have clarified that this revision now requires that the insulation and the piping as a system are tested to meet that flame and smoke spread. The division did some review, and there are several pipe installations that already have this listing that's needed to show that you can, wrap pipe with many installations that are already being used as commonly. Of course, there aren't many HVAC pipes that wouldn't meet the flame and smoke spread that you'd be potentially running through a plenum. However, when it comes to other pipes, say within the plumbing program, they might need to use this path to be compliant in a plenum. So there's a minor potential fiscal impact if people aren't using these installations already. It might, but this is to allow their essentially a high flame and smoke spread pipe to be installed in a plenum. Next item is of issue. We're retaining Oregon Amendment for Table 603.4 about metal duct construction thicknesses, sort of maintaining the same table and thicknesses that we use. Some of them are a little bit sturdier, some of them are lighter. For when you're doing metal duct in a dwelling unit, it's pretty much aligning with what we have in the residential code. So we're retaining that amendment from past codes. Next big item is probably 607.5.5. just some clarification on subducts that penetrate shaft enclosures. Again, that this is a method to avoid doing a fire damper and a fire smoke, or a fire and smoke damper when people are using this path. On ventilation, air distribution 608.1. The last item on chapter 6. This is just really a new section clarifying that, yes, you need to be able to balance exhaust flow requirements as well as supply flow requirements. You know, when you're needing, chapter 4 is setting some minimum ventilation requirements. And this is just stating that, yes, you do need some method to adjust the flow to meet at least the minimum ventilation requirements. So sometimes really a clarification of what is the obvious of need of meet test and balance for commercial exhaust and ducts and supply systems. With that, are there any additional questions regarding chapter 6 and duct systems from the board? All right, at the pleasure of the chair, I will continue.
Please.
Excuse me?
Please.
Okay. Combustion air, no significant changes were made to chapter 7 for combustion air. Chapter 8, there is a potential impact for oil-fired appliances to require a blocked vent switch, which would be similar to, you know, a blocked vent switch that you have on a residential natural gas furnace. There may be a slight fiscal impact on this. I would look to the board. The committee hadn't seen many new oil-fired appliances being installed. So trying to, make sure that, you know, that it's a minor impact, but noting that, you know, oil-fired appliances do need a switch. You'll excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that, Chair Hansen. So moving forward, that is, if no one has questions about chapter 8 item, we can move forward to chapter 9 about specific appliances, wood burning hydronic heaters. That's just clarifying that it is allowed to do the hydronic heaters if they have EPA listings, and of course that aligns with Oregon DEQ clean emissions requirements. They are allowed now that these appliances do have listings with the EPA now. The new and interesting one that we had heard about in the past, and this is out is the addition as available appliances to put in are unvented alcohol fuel burning decorative appliances. For those that they're allowed if they are listed and cover appliances. These are little decorative, you know, you may see them in a restaurant, or they're putting them in living rooms now. These little alcohol fired decorative fireplaces, they are included as a regulated appliance, and they do need to have, you know, the listings for installation. Any questions on chapter 9, the 2 items? All right. Moving on to chapter 10, boilers, water heaters, and pressure vessels. As noted, this is really because boilers and water heaters and pressure vessels are really the authority of the plumbing code and the boiler code. This gets reworked. We're maintaining the Oregon amendments from last time. that cover boiler and pressure vessel related items that are outside of the boiler code and outside of the plumbing code. So for the piping systems, strainers, and the like, still maintaining that, but no revisions to Chapter 10. On Chapter 11, for refrigeration, we'd had a long discussion about refrigeration in previous meetings. The International Mechanical Code is doing more to move pretty much all of the ammonia language into, or to just refer to the IIAR standards instead of trying to bring in language that might be misaligned with this ANSI standard for ammonia refrigeration. Just really, it's not a significant change. It's just, you'll see that most of the references have changed from bringing in that IAR language to just referring to compliance with the IAR. Not a lot of ammonia refrigeration happens, but we do have some industrial, refrigerated warehouse type situations where you can still see ammonia today. With that, we had previously done statewide alternate method 2101. We're looking to continue that statewide alternate method with the standard, with new IMC. The refrigerant tables did expand to include the refrigerants that we had discussed when statewide alternate method 2101 was passed. But by maintaining that alternate method, if standard 34 adds a new refrigerant, and seems to be the pattern, that it wouldn't take a special local alternate method to be able to use those refrigerants. Continue that moving forward. Moving down to page 4 for section 1105.9, what Oregon does is to make sure that when we're in alignment with the building code and the fire provisions that are construction related that are brought in to the OSSC, we really point, when it comes to machinery room, means of egress and size and the fire protection, we don't duplicate the language here. We make the reference to the the building code. So if you have a large machinery room, we make the pointer to the building code. We're not deleting the requirements. We're just making sure that the people who are doing that regulation are the proper ones reading and enforcing that language. But pointing out that when you do have a machinery room, to be aware of it when you're doing the mechanical design. When it comes to refrigerant piping, the model code in sections 1107 through 1110 have brought in refrigerant piping language specific to refrigerant piping. It used to be that you'd sort of look to piping in chapter 12, but this is not hydronic piping, so we have just detailed language on piping, the piping types, how to affix it, the installation methods for refrigerant piping versus looking at it as hydronic piping, because we are seeing some of this pipe hits really high pressures with the new alternative refrigerants that are out there. In chapter 11, we maintain the deletion of section 1102.3. This is a post-occupancy item that something about when you're maintaining equipment, we can't set requirements in the Oregon code or in the building codes for that. So are there any questions on chapter 11 for the division? Give people one more chance to mute. Okay, well, we will move on then. Thank you. Again, moving to chapter 12, hydronic piping. We're maintaining a Oregon amendment about cross-linked polyethylene. It's been in our code for some time about this has to do primarily with embedded piping. We're retaining it. this editorial change for Oregon, moving that forward. There is a new pipe type that is available. It's a CPVC, AL, CPVC piping, so that has a, that aluminum layer in there. Not sure of the amount of use in Oregon, but it does have a new piping type has been added to the piping lists. So more flexibility if that's a material you're looking to use. Any questions on chapter 12?
Simple. Nope.
Okay. Chapters 13 and 14, no changes were made to fuel oil piping or to solar thermal systems. The appendices A, B, and C maintained. Again, we get rid of the Board of Appeals Appendix C and our Oregon Appendix C. Now we get into the big fun one, which is fuel gas. One item that came in through the International Fuel Gas Code was about concealed condensate piping. There was an addition to the language to look at, you may have a primary condensate drain and then a secondary backup drain for condensate piping from fuel equipment. And it may disappear into a wall, and where it reappears out of the wall, model code says, please identify which is the primary drain and which is the secondary drain, because you want to know, if you see water coming out of the secondary drain, you know that you need to maintain something. It's a slight fiscal increase. The code committee noted that there wasn't much to say how you mark that piping. Is it a Sharpie or what? They modified the language to say that secondary drain needs to be clearly marked with an embossed or engraved tag or in an approved manner. So if you have some other way and there's specific, marker tape that's specifically for secondary drain, you can buy special marking tape, but that leaves some flexibility. But to have something that will still show a year or two later, won't get painted over, that, this drain, if you see fluid coming out of it, you may need to address your condensing gas appliance. On section C310, on corrugated steel tubing, there was a public proposal, OMSC 2204, about providing the bonding for CSST pipe. Of course, in earlier sections of the code, it does require that CSST is done for the manufacturer's installation instructions. The proposal was modified to make sure that there's a pointer that any bonding is done per the electrical code, because bonding of pipe, not only per the manufacturer's installation instructions, but when it is done, this is electrical work. You need to make sure that you aren't putting that bonding to the wrong point. So this has been something about the CSST pipe that doesn't have the newer lightning or protection jacketing, and they have a slightly different bonding requirement than the newer protected CSST piping. On press connect joints, C402.7 and C202, becoming really popular to do the newer press connect type connections. This is noting that the code now recognizes joints suitable for pipe over 5 PSI for indoor applications. Of course, will be per the MII, and you might need a different, the piping and of course and the fittings need to be all labeled for that and approved for that use. But you can now use press connect for even higher pressure gas pipe, as long as the system is, designated for that. So that will ease some of the, the pipe threading, and provides alternate methods again for people who wish to use the press connect systems.
Okay.
403.8 is just a minor change, just clarifying, sealing it, the gas threaded connections. Oregon maintains, going back to press connect fittings. Of course, most metal pipe, gas pipe doesn't require protection against physical damage, say when it's going through a stud, you don't need to provide a protection plate at those locations. You do need it for something like CSST or lighter tubing. Oregon made sure that when we're talking about exempted steel pipe, it needs to be at least Schedule 40, because some of these press connect systems, you can use, lighter schedule piping for press connect. And those could potentially be struck by a nail or screw being put into the wall. So those would need to provide that protector, maintaining that. Oregon amendment on chimney lining and cleanouts will go down to C503.5.6. This is really, there's a, the lining language there's still an allowance for inspection, but it's really putting you to where you do need lining if you're using the existing chimney that's been there for a while. They have deleted some language that had to do with cleanouts and inspection and looking at, an older chimney that has a cleanout at the bottom. This might have a minor fiscal impact per the code committee. Not a lot of this is done, but we do still have the language about making sure that an existing chimney, if you're going to reuse it with a new appliance, that it's, is inspected. Venting system terminal clearances. This is new model code language about through the wall vent clearances. What has come in and out of code through the years has been where the diagram, if some of you are familiar with this, of where a sidewall vent or a vent through the roof for, type 4 appliances, how close they can be to windows or a gas meter, etc. This diagram has been in an appendix in the code. It was taken out for a short period where they said use manufacturer's installation instructions. We've come full circle and the diagram is back into code, and because a lot of manufacturers, and because of this, a lot of manufacturers are no longer listing their clearances to doors, windows, etc. They're going back to using the model code. So we do have this in. It's not a significant change. It's just bringing it back into the code book again and not having to look at the manufacturer's clearances. C503.10.7 about vent connector junctions. It's sort of, let's say, overstating the obvious. Where vent connectors come together, it does need to either be a Y or a T connection, or it needs to be a fitting. You can't just field cut a hole to make your T or your Y and staple them together. It needs to be using an actual fitting for your T or your Y. C618.6 about return air from mechanical rooms. It's not a change. It's just clarifying that, yes, you shouldn't be pulling return air for a furnace from the mechanical room it's sitting in. This section does apply to warm air furnaces. Just wanted to make sure people knew what that section was about. We're getting into specific appliances now in the C600 sections. On commercial cooking appliances, an exception that allowed you to put a commercial cooking appliance within a dwelling when a PE does the design has been removed from the model code. If people are looking to put appliances that aren't listed for use in a dwelling unit into a home, it could probably still be done with a PE, but that would be if a professional engineer does design it, it would probably have to be a local alternate method now, so that it's really clear. that someone is trying to put a deep fat fryer into their home. So. And with that, to the board, and that is it for the natural gas, the fuel gas section, Appendix C. Does anyone have any questions about Appendix C?
Oh. Does anybody have any questions at all about any of the proposed changes in moving forward? Okay, seeing none. Mark, I really appreciate section 7 or chapter 5, smokers in ovens with integral exhaust. I read that too fast and I thought we were entering in some type of unique social engineering. We're not putting smokers into ovens with integral type 1 exhaust hoods. I had to look at that really 2 times. Anyhow, moving forward, we have 3 options, and I am looking for a motion or a motion or a motion. A motion to approve with the recommended with the recommendations for the 2022 OMC. If we need an amendment, we need a motion for that, and we need a motion to disapprove. Would anybody like to make a motion along those lines? I would recommend we make a motion to approve the recommendations.
Well, I would second that. This is Eric through the chair. I would move that we adopt and approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Mr. Chair, we need to do a roll call vote. Sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I just want to jump in here for a second. I want to make sure that I understand that the motion to approve would be with a finding that from the board that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Okay. Okay, Andy. Thank you very much. We will do this really better. We have a motion to approve the recommendations for modifications to the 2022 OMSC and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption, with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources. Melissa, will you please call the roll?
Derek Frazier.
Approved, yay.
Chris Miller.
Yay.
Jed Sherman.
Yay.
Ted Zook.
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric Fanning.
Yay.
Chair Jay Hansen.
Yay.
Motion carries.
Unanimous. Good work, men and women. That moves us to announcements. Do any board members have some announcements to bring to the committee?
I have one that's not on the agenda, but just for just as an FYI, there are 3 candidates that have come to OBOA to apply for the open inspector position on the mechanical board. OBOA is going to be having interviews with them and determine which one will be the one that they recommend, but you should be seeing those applications come in, one of them with an OBOA recommendation.
Excellent. Excellent work. Well done. Any other announcements?
Chair Hansen, through you, Eric Fanning, I just want to thank Melissa for her efforts and putting on our literature that comes out, showing our term, because that we kind of forget about when our terms expire and such. So much appreciated on the efforts, and also thank Mark, your excellent job. Really appreciate it.
This is a great staff. Everybody on this staff does a very good job. Thank you for pointing that out, Eric. Appreciate that. Any other announcements? Hearing none, I'm going to move to adjournment. So it's your last chance to jump in. Anyway, we will move to adjournment. There being no further business at 10:42. We are adjourned.